Welcome to Vanguard, a heretical podcast on culture, society, and politics. Here are your hosts, Colin, Liddell, Andy Nowicki, and Richard Spencer.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a special Christmas edition of Vanguard. This is Richard Spencer, and I am, as usual, joined by my friends and co-host, Andy Nowicki, who's joining us from down south in Georgia, and Colin Liddell, who's joining us from the far east in Tokyo, Japan. So, Andy and Colin, how are you doing?
Yo ho ho, Richard.
This is I was excited about the Christmas special because I wish we could have guests or it's kind of like I could be there like, hey everybody, look who's here, Shirley MacLaine. But anyway, we let me do this. Today we're going to talk about a couple of things. One of which we wanted to pick up on the discussion we had of The Hobbit, which was somewhat interrupted the last time because I had to go off to a Christmas party. But we just wanted to kind of tie up some loose ends with that. And then we're going to talk about Django Unchained, which is Tarantino's latest. And then we're going to go on to just talk about Christmas in general, the war on Christmas, the pagan aspects of the holiday, and what it means, commercialization, stuff like that. We'll just talk about that. Hopefully we'll get everyone in the season. This is certainly, it's my favorite season, my favorite holiday by far, actually.
Yeah.
First off,
that's because of the skiing, isn't it?
Well, that's part of it. It's kind of everything. There's just something about even in my little small town where I live, when I just walk down Main Street after dark, and there are Christmas lights and people busily looking into shop windows or something. I don't know. There's something that I can't help but be a little bit sentimental about it all. It is very festive, and that's a very wonderful thing. And I look forward to eating a big dinner with family and things like that. How is the atmosphere of Christmas over in Japan? I'm curious.
Well, it's they're very into Christmas, the image of Christmas. Uh-huh. The decorations, the presents. They don't actually have a holiday on Christmas Day, so most people do work on Christmas Day. Oh. I think they have a holiday on the 24th this year because that's connected to the Emperor's birthday or something.
Well, is that no coincidence? Is that literally his birthday, or is that?
It's the 23rd, but that's on a Sunday, so it gets bumped on a day.
Oh, okay.
But in Japan, also, Christmas is very much a kind of a romantic time for young couples in love.
Oh, that's interesting.
Really?
Well, it's kind of funny because there's a lot of Christian conversion in Korea, and there's a large Christian population in China, but there doesn't seem to be a very large Christian population in Japan. But they seem to have swallowed Christmas whole. They've gone all in on. Yeah. Shopping, I guess that's probably.
Well, they're very into the kind of certain cultural aspects of the West, and right. See them as very marketable. Companies obviously see them as an opportunity to make a bit of money. So it's sort of promoted by the business sector in many cases. But having said that, I think the pagan aspects of Christmas kind of resonate with the Japanese, who are, in many senses, a kind of highly evolved pagan culture.
Yeah. Well, we're going to talk about that. Christmas is one of the most pagan holidays at least in terms of the aesthetics and the accoutrements, but actually even in deeper terms as well. But we'll talk about that in the course of time. First off, before we jump back into The Hobbit, I just wanted to mention a couple of things, and that is about fundraising, and that is to thank everyone who's given money. So if you enjoy this show, please just throw a few coins into our begging hands.
Excellent.
A few alms.
And did you want to say that Radix is is making its way to people's mailboxes.
Yes. Radix, unfortunately, the printer was a bit slow on delivering Radix to me because everyone, we're so busy with the holidays or what have you. But Radix is at the moment making its way to me, and soon Radix will be making its way to you. And I'll do a super quick turnaround time due to the massive lateness of this. But yes, everyone should have Radix quite soon. Everything's been signed off on. It's been printed, and I guess he's just delivering it to me first, and then I will deliver it to all of you. Okay, let's move right along into a discussion of The Hobbit and just kind of tie up some loose ends that we had there. One thing, Colin, that we were talking about before we went on the air was this aspect of The Hobbit of it's feeding off the past in a way. That the whole idea that we like seeing movies about swordplay and little gnomes and magicians and things like that is that it evokes the medieval world and our own European past. But it kind of evokes it in a world where all those things are gone. And we're kind of going to the strip mall or Cineplex and picking out on popcorn and Coca-Cola while we watch this kind of medieval fantasy. But just talk a little bit about this, about The Hobbit and our connection with the past.
Yeah. Well, it's not just limited to The Hobbit. I mean, most of our popular culture and computer games now, it's all based on kind of heroic struggles and a lot of fighting. And all these are things that don't really exist in the present. And so there's a kind of parasitical relationship to past history. And almost like an atavistic craving for this kind of conflict and struggle. These movies are appealing to that sense in people. I mean, the Hobbit itself seems to hark back to things like the Dark Age history of Europe, partly inspired by Wagner's Ring Cycle, by his studies of Anglo-Saxon kingdoms and tribes and various pieces of Germanic history. So, Tolkien sort of took that as the basis of the story. But it's kind of interesting that he brought in these kind of magical elements to the degree that he did, because also I think that the Lord of the Rings cycle, there is a kind of little bit of a Hegelian element in there.
Well, explain that.
With the Ring cycle, that's much more about the kind of Teutonic gods.
Yeah.
But with the Lord of the Rings, it's much more kind of pseudo-historical. You have all these kind of pseudo-countries like Mordor, etc. And the battles are the kind of key elements in the story. You have all these big set-piece battles. So it is a very historical thing. And you have these different ages. I think with the last of the Lord of the Rings films, there's a kind of resolution with the perfect king.
Well, right, and you do have him inaugurating the Age of Man.
Yeah.
Essentially. Although you do see that in Wagner as well. I mean, the final episode of the Ring Cycle is the Twilight of the Gods. I mean, the gods...
that sounds a bit negative, though, doesn't it?
Well, the gods are brought low. And also
like
the...
retrogressive Hegelianism, like we were talking about earlier.
Well, kind of. I mean... Wotan is always seeking out a kind of human who will in some ways bring about the end of the gods and bring about a new world. And he first finds this in Sigmund, and then he finds it eventually in Sigmund's incestuous progeny, Siegfried. And as a kind of, it is. I agree. Actually, there is a kind of Hegelianism, using that term lightly or loosely. Of a kind of, a certain age reaches its, internal contradictions and breaks down and collapses, and then a new one is born from the rubble, kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I think there was something going on. There was something in the air in Central and Western Europe, in the late 19th century and early 20th century that these kinds of stories arose from there. And I don't know how to put my finger on it. I mean, one obvious way is just the environmentalism. And I think I did speak about this, or at least touched on it in the last podcast. that there is a kind of radical traditionalist, maybe, or radical environmentalist critique that Tolkien's in offering, and I think at the end of the second film, I'm just going on the films here. There's this climactic battle. I'm forgetting where it takes place, but it's kind of like a last stand type battle. And at one point, the old oaken trees kind of come out of the forest and start smashing the orgs, whatever those evil creatures are. And because Mordor is cutting down all the trees and kind of industrializing the countryside. So there's go ahead.
Richard, this is sounding like a perverted version of the opening of the Summer Olympics. I remember you talking about that and the Industrial Revolution and all the whole presentation of that. It seemed like it really stuck with you, and this is what you're saying now. It seems like in some ways a kind of another variation on that theme.
Well, I think it's something that clearly resonates with people, and one thing that I'm thinking about is Patrice Chéreau's famous production of Wagner's Ring, which he did at Bayreuth, I believe, in 1976. And it was a kind of left-wing Marxian interpretation, but it wasn't at the same time. And in another way, it was a kind of Tolkien interpretation of the Ring. And you have the gods are these kind of industrial capitalist, and the gold is a kind of obvious metaphor, and they're essentially kind of raping nature. I think the beginning, the Rhine goddesses are trapped in a big dam, and all this kind of stuff, and the allegories are kind of fast and loose in a way, like you don't want to push too hard on what all this means. But in some ways, it was a kind of romantic, vision of like, the twilight of the gods is like the collapse of industrial society, and finally people are brought closer in touch with nature or something, which is a kind of
they all go back to being little hobbits. Is that
exactly? Which is a kind of like anti-Marxian, like Marx's worst nightmare, actually.
Right.
He wanted, he thought the bourgeoisie, they were on the right track. They just he
was pro-industrialism.
Yeah, he's pro-bourgeois in a ironic way.
Right.
He wanted the bourgeois world to dominate the globe. Until its internal contradictions led to something new. But so I don't know. Maybe there's just this romantic spirit that's with us all over the place. I mean, because even the left. I mean, this brings us to other territories. But one thing that's interesting about the left environmentalism is that for all the things that we might dislike about it, it kind of flips over into radical traditionalism at some point.
Oh, definitely, yeah, because there's that kind of utopianism in the left, which when you evoke an image of it, it is this kind of very Hobbit-like world, where everybody is living a carefree, stressless existence.
Yeah.
And, like we talked about earlier, this kind of industrialism and, the bourgeoisie and capitalism, that's a kind of transitional stage that resolves itself in this utopian, idyllic world. And I think Marx was actually pointed in that direction, wasn't he?
Oh, yeah.
And Marx, the thing about the kind of cultural left vision of that we're discussing now, this kind of anti-industrialist vision, or going back to primitivism or idealizing primitivism, it's almost always, and of course Marx wanted colonization, wanted the European countries to spread across the globe and dominate all the natives, and as you say, Richard, bring the bourgeois vision to the whole world, and then then the world would be ripe for the proletarian revolt. But what we're just discussing now, this kind of leftist vision of a utopian society now, it embraces a kind of radical traditionalism, but it seems like it's always of a non-white variety. Like there's this idealization of the American Indians as these pure, peaceful, good-hearted, noble savages who really had it right, and this continent was going swell before the white man came.
that maybe comes a bit later, because if you go back to Marx's time, he's sort of looking back to this kind of European idyllic past. And then what you're talking about sounds a bit more like the sort of spin the Frankfurt School put on it later. And I think that arose because the proletariat were actually seduced by the bourgeois vision of mass industrialism and consumerism.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Well, yeah, I mean, the proletarian were turned into consumers at some level as well. And they became, it wasn't just a situation where capitalism was impoverishing the lower orders to the point of slavery or destitution. Mm-hmm. I mean, that certainly did not happen in Western Europe. And then obviously the great irony of a communist Marxist revolution occurring in the place which was probably least industrialized. At least Russia was tremendously less industrialized than London.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Although actually you shouldn't.
But I mean, you have this.
You shouldn't. I don't know. I don't. It's not that important. You shouldn't also think that Russia was non-industrialized or unmodern or something. That's kind of wrong as well. But go ahead, Andy.
There's this. Well, as I was saying, it's this whatever it sprang from. Maybe it was partly the meddling of the Frankfurt School or whomever. But this idealization of either the American Indians, that's what we hear a lot, here in North America, or the tribal Africans, or other
Scottish Highlanders,
primitive cultures.
Primitive cultures, Scots.
But just of people who are exotic in some way, like and there was even this movie a few years ago. I don't know if you've seen it, Colin, The Last Emperor.
The Last Samurai.
The Last Samurai, yeah. That was pretty much like what Dances with Wolves was for the American plains. That was that same movie set in Japan and idealizing the Japanese culture, traditional Japanese culture, as opposed to American
very
Indian
kind of
culture.
Macho, hierarchical, and brutalistic Japanese culture of the samurai.
Yeah. So it's I don't know. I just think it is interesting. There is I just felt compelled to point that out, at least as I see it.
Yeah, I mean, what I would say, Andy, I don't think we should always have this knee-jerk reaction against a lot of the left, because it's like, yes, without question, the left, they're anti-family, they're anti-white, they're, the litany goes on. But maybe if you just turn a kind of sympathetic eye towards them and you understand that what is their motivation? Like, why do they hate capitalism so much? And maybe some people hate capitalism for truly disgusting reasons. It's like it doesn't distribute enough mass junk to the world, We need socialized Walmarts on every corner so that every single person can have a flat screen and veg out all day. That's kind of a disgusting left vision. But I think a lot of leftists are kind of confused radical traditionalists in a funny way. And that
I think you're right.
And that even in the Indian, even if it is like anti-white, the Indian does have this like sense of hierarchy and tradition. I even remember, Alex Kurtagich wrote a blog piece for alt-right, probably like a year and a half ago or so, where there was some, white, confused white liberal who went and like married an African tribesman. And, we can have a knee-jerk, like, racist reaction to that. Be like, God, she should be killed, race mixer, And granted, I'm not, I don't exactly endorse anything like that. But maybe at some secret, unconscious level, she was actually searching out a father figure and wanted to live in a traditionalist society.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, again...
And the same with these cases of Western women converting to Islam that you occasionally hear about in the media as well.
Yeah, it's kind of like, it's a weird, I think to bring back Hegel, I mean, everything's dialectical. Everything is itself and its opposite at the same time. And, so that Islamic conversion is like the most PC thing you can do, but it's in other weird way kind of like the most un-PC thing you could possibly do.
Yeah.
It's kind of, it flips back and forth. Let me also bring up one more thing. I did notice that, if you just do a basic Google search around the internet, you can easily find all this stuff about Tolkien's a racist and all this and kind of thing. And they do use these ideas of races and peoples and so on and so forth. But I think
Tolkien kind of invents all these races, doesn't he, really? Because basically he's doing something very atavistic, which is going back into Europe's past. And obviously at that time, Europe was very Nordicist anyway.
Oh, yeah.
But if everybody in Lord of the Rings is some sort of Nordic warrior, then the story itself will suffer. So he creates all these kind of various groups based on mythological or supernatural figures like elves and dwarfs and so on.
Yeah.
And obviously there's a kind of benefit to the writer because he's created much more kind of dramatic variety in that way. And then people in the modern age are attracted to it for sub-racist motives because they read their own kind of like racial situation into the story. And then you can actually then turn that around and criticize Tolkien for being racist. But basically, the way I read it is he's just recycling all this kind of Germanic Dark Age history and myth, and then he's trying to make it varied. And so he does create these different groups, and he has to create these different groups because it's a group-driven narrative, which takes us back to the kind of Hegelian aspect of Lord of the Rings.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's true, and I think again, Tolkien himself was a total anti-fascist, anti-Nazi, and at least philo-Semitic to some degree. So I mean, in some ways, his modern liberal credentials are beyond reproach. But it is a kind of fascist story, an element, because I think so much of what fascism and Nazism is about was about kind of marrying modernism with traditionalism and naturalism in a way. And I'm actually drawn to Frederick Spott's book, excellent book on I think it's called Hitler and the Power of Aesthetics. And
yes, that's right. I read that.
Yeah, it's a really good volume. I recommend anyone to read it. But there's this interesting aspect of something like the Autobahn itself. It obviously mass highway transportation. This was not only modernist, but it was also cutting edge. I mean, this is like a new idea. Yeah. And yet he did that. Yet at the same time, he would use the Autobahn, and it was not that efficient. It would kind of go out of its way and take you on a nature tour, so you'd like get in touch with the countryside and things things like this. So there's this kind of flip side of everything of how they were. He was trying to meld modernism and naturalism. And I think in some ways that is a kind of fascist aesthetic, like the idea that we would go to a film and we'd have this like modern film, more frames per second than ever used before, CGI, the works, and yet we're seeing these dark age mythical creatures. I think in some ways that's what probably gives, these leftists the willies. So
it's this blend of primitivism and futurism.
They're all Nordic looking.
Yeah, right. Blend of futurism and primitivism. Primitivism
kind of evokes Japan for me in certain ways.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and I would say the aesthetic. Also aesthetically speaking, all of the characters are clearly of Caucasian, background. So there's this. So that kind of maybe adds to the mystique of what you're describing. Maybe amps up the extent to which it gives the leftist mentality, or the willies, as you've called it.
I think that's the best way to do it, because a lot of these people just operate pure on what they smell.
Yeah,
kind of. It's not really rationality.
And it wouldn't smell so bad to them if these were a bunch of American Indians or a bunch of African natives, but that they look the way that they do,
Yeah, right. If it were an African Hobbit, that would be fine. Like even if it were a primeval like African myth.
And you could cast pygmies as well in the roles, couldn't you?
Yeah, you wouldn't need CGI. You just have actual pygmies.
This is the thing that kind of bothers me about the Hobbit, though, because people are supposed to take their role models and their heroes from movies.
Yeah.
People instinctively do that. And our role models and hero figures are all these little midgets. And you have this vast film, because the film itself, the canvas on which it's painted is greatly expanded, which kind of heightens this effect. And then you have these heroes who are occupying this vast 9-hour, 48 frames a second 3D canvas, and they're all little midgets and dwarfs.
Yeah.
What sort of message does that send out to people, I wonder?
I guess it's an egalitarian one.
Yeah, and also they're so dependent on luck. You know, I mean, they're not actually in control of anything. You know, throughout the first third of the movie, it's all about how lucky they are, how they manage to escape all these death-defying situations.
Oh yeah, I mean, Bilbo doesn't even want to go on the adventure. I mean, it's kind of thrust upon him, and he's like, "Oh, well, I guess I'll go on this thing." You know, it's not really the hero who has to go through a transformation. It is. I agree. It's a lot of someone was saying that it's almost like Star Trek is the depiction of a truly scientific socialist society, and then The Hobbit is kind of a depiction of a Catholic distributist society in a way. But in a way that I would probably have a lot of criticisms, because there's no great man in the Hobbit world. You know, if you look at the Hobbits, what they worry about most is someone rocking the boat. You know, if someone comes in and is too loud or too ambitious or something, they get freaked out. They're kind of, they're kind of like little dogs almost. Like all they want is to sleep and get their hot meal.
And they're petty hedonists.
Yeah, they are to a degree. I guess they're being a little harsh there.
Well, they are. They're always partying and smoking weed, and they like to drink a lot, and they do seem to be very kind of focused on the pleasures of the body. And there's the orcs are actually much more noble in a way.
They've got ambition.
Exactly. They want to take over the world. They want to push themselves to the limit,
Yeah, it's true. I mean, and the hobbits don't have will to power. I mean, that's clear. And man has will to power. That's why man can't handle the ring, because the ring is power and lust and Faustian world domination. So only these little like basset hounds can handle the ring. Because they don't want it. They don't want to take over the world. They just want to eat pudding.
Exactly, yeah. Pudding eaters shall inherit the earth.
Right. So it is a kind of egalitarian myth. But well, anyway, shall we now move on to Django Unchained? I guess, Andy, you wanted to talk about this. Let me just mention a couple things just to set up the whole conversation. Because I was actually on the Political Cesspool, which is James Edwards, our friend, his program, and I should probably get a tape of that and put it up on the website. But anyway, we talked a little bit about the movies, and we talked about Lincoln, and I guess what I was kind of saying, he was like, this movie is so anti-white, it's all about killing as many white people as possible, blah, blah, blah. And I guess my response was like, well, okay, but, in some ways, we maybe for our purposes, it's better to have more Django Unchained and Machete's movies because they kind of bring it out all into the open, while Lincoln is a kind of insidious film, and that it appeals to all these white people's moral sense, and they feel kind of high and mighty watching it. But maybe if they were, forced to watch Django Unchained, they might want to stick up with their civilization. Anyway, Andy, you wanted to talk about Django. What's your take on it?
I have a couple different takes on it. First, I'm generally speaking a Quentin Tarantino fan. I like most of his movies. I thought, Pulp Fiction was, of course, maybe it's a little overrated, because, it is, people talk about it and quote from it so much, maybe it gets a little old after a while. But it was a really, a terrific film, very well made and well acted, memorable dialogue, very funny, shocking, and just a lot of different a lot of different stuff thrown together in a format that was very challenging. A nonlinear format that kind of makes you have to stop and think and piece things together, which is not the kind of demand that most mainstream films make on you, but at the same time still very entertaining. So I liked it a lot, and I also, a lot of people in our ideological neck of the woods were pretty down on Tarantino for Inglourious Bastards a few years ago, but I actually thought that was also a good film and much more nuanced in its presentation than I think a lot of people thought it was, or who just reacted to it in a knee-jerk kind of way, like, oh, this is just a Jewish revenge fantasy and all the Germans are evil and blah blah blah. I didn't think it played out like that at all. And again, it was also, like Pulp Fiction, very well made and very entertaining and fun to watch, and it challenged the viewer in various ways that you weren't expecting. So I tend to be a Tarantino fan. I think, like you, Richard, I'm probably going to sit this one out, but I'm doing so reluctantly. It seems like ultimately it is probably going to be a rather obnoxious movie that will irritate me if I watch it. But I think it's probably also very well made and probably clever. And so I guess I'm not as anti this movie as it seems like some people are, again, in our neck of the woods. So that's one take that I have. And the other is just with regard to this whole idea of a boycott. There have been some people out there who have been saying, this is, such a anti-white film, clearly. And I'm not going to, I suspect that it is.
Who's saying that, just out of curiosity?
I don't know. It's just.
I remember when we had this. There's this guy who's kind of vanished from the scene. Forgetting his name at the moment, but I remember he was like boycotting Machete and stuff like. He was like a national anarchist of sorts.
Yeah, I remember. I know who you're talking about.
Dropped out, but I'm not really into boycotting myself, although I don't really like activism that much. But to me, there's something about. And of course, you should see what you want to see, and then if you don't think you're going to enjoy something, then don't see it. Yeah.
There's a kind of self-righteousness or sanctimony about the whole boycotting of a movie that just to me anyway, it hits me on a visceral level where I just don't like it. And there's also the fact that I am presuming that this is going to be an obnoxious movie, an anti-white movie, but I don't know. I haven't seen it, and so I don't ultimately know, and I'm not presuming to.
You can give us the other side of the spectrum on this, but aren't these? They are kind of fantasy histories and kind of like comic book histories. It's almost like it is Lincoln the Vampire Slayer or something, because you have. And we've kind of gone through an interesting trajectory with all this. You had these Holocaust movies. I guess the first one was called Holocaust in the 70s and late 70s, and then that probably
it was a documentary, wasn't it?
No, I think that was a miniseries on NBC or something.
Holocaust
starring Meryl Streep. But yeah, you had some other documentaries in there that were important, and then you kind of had the pinnacle in the mid-90s with Schindler's List, and it was kind of like the ultimate victim narrative. And then there seemed to be a kind of like reaction to the victim narrative of, well, why didn't they fight back? And then you had like Defiance, and I guess maybe The Pianist was kind of a echo of Schindler's List, a kind of victim narrative. And then it's almost like you went into, after that peak occurred, you kind of like went into La La Land with Inglourious Bastards, where, it's just like, not only did they fight back, but they killed Hitler and won the war.
Well, it's obviously not meant to be taken seriously.
But
I haven't actually seen
I bet some people like almost, this is history for them. Keep in mind, when they do surveys of Americans, Americans, most of them believe that, like, Julius Caesar was born in Nevada in his palace.
I'm sure that a lot of people. I'm sure that a lot of people saw *Inglourious Basterds* and said, "Oh, I didn't know that was how Hitler died." I mean, that didn't occur to me before just now, but I bet you that's the case.
And that's kind of is Tarantino. I mean, Tarantino. I think I said this with James. Like Tarantino he kind of makes pornography in a way, and another way you could say it, in the sense that there's no there. You know, there's nothing behind. I mean, and that's not to say that Pulp Fiction isn't it's a very well crafted movie, and it's well acted and very clever, and there's just some kind of funny things about the whole thing. But there's nothing behind it all. Like they can talk about how French dip their French fries in mayonnaise, and they call the cheese, a Big Mac a Royale with cheese. That doesn't fit with any part of the story. Like, there's nothing. If the story is anything, it's Samuel Jackson pointing his gun at, that guy who's robbing the Denny's or something and saying, like, I have the power because I hold the gun. So it's like the whole point of the movie isn't
that character development, the thing about the French fries and the Royale?
Well, it's it's character development in the sense that, like, Seinfeld is character development. I mean, it's the Seinfeld of movie. It's Seinfeld of violence.
Because it kind of sets up this slightly pretentious character, which he later acts out in the later scene you just referred to.
Maybe.
Well, I thought. I mean.
But to finish my point, I think Tarantino, it's like it is pornography in the sense that he's referencing all these 70s movies that he watched when he was a video store clerk, and he's kind of being clever and cute. But
it's only pornography if you jerk off, though, isn't it?
Well, is that your definition of pornography? Well, some people might jerk off to
they're limited in our definition.
To each his own.
I think it's just recycling, isn't it? I mean, it comes back to the theme of the kind of death of culture, and Tarantino's talent is taking old things and recycling them. And the way he does it makes him seem, it creates the illusion of being new and cutting edge for a brief passing moment.
Yeah, without question. And I think also, I'm kind of interested in these whole ideas of social mood and these kinds of theories. And I think it was kind of interesting. It was like in the 80s, you had, rising economy, rising stock market. People were kind of patriots. People were feeling good about themselves. And you had all these, like, you had Rambo 2, rather, not Rambo 1, which is very different. And, Schwarzenegger films, big, like blow your enemies to holy hell, and, Aliens 2, where you had Sigourney Weaver, like, the massive machine. It was a very 80s style, like, kick-ass.
Don't people also get into those kind of, big macho role models when they're feeling insecure as well, though?
Well, that might be true. I mean, you can look in the 70s, you had Dirty Harry and Bronson.
Clint Eastwood.
Yeah, Death Wish and Dirty Harry.
Yeah, but those are different than, like, the heroic Schwarzenegger movies. The different tone. It's kind of like, what are you going to do?
Less cocaine involved, probably.
Yeah. So anyway, what I'm saying is that that you had the 80s and you had this, like, kind of uncut action, extravaganza, and then there had to be a reaction to that. And you had the early 90s. You had people moved from, like, synth pop to grunge music. And I think Tarantino kind of fit perfectly in that because he kind of, like, revived the 1970s. And his movies didn't make sense. They were violent. They were about deadbeats. They were, it was kind of like the anti-Commando movie or something. Like.
I happen to think. I don't know if I would say that Pulp Fiction was about, quote unquote, about that much, but I do think the character arc we see with Samuel L. Jackson's character in that movie, and again, it's been a little while since I've seen it, but how he experiences what he thinks is a miracle, what he takes to be a miracle, and how it changes him, and how he decides to leave the scene in that, like, that last scene in the movie that you referenced a few minutes ago, Richard, where he's got the gun pointed at was it Tim Roth, the guy who's trying to rob the restaurant that he's in, and where he says, now I know I'm the tyranny of evil men, but I'm trying real hard to be the shepherd. And then he lets him go. And that's how it ends. I found that pretty riveting. But I'm not saying it's a immensely meaningful film, but it does, I think there's something there, something of some substance,
Mm-hmm.
Do
you think Samuel Jackson character kind of became a Christian mystic or something afterward, or?
Yeah, that was the impression I had.
Yeah.
That which is an unexpected twist in the midst of all of this, this raunch and debauchery and just violence and it really caught me off guard and kind of again I found it pretty compelling. But Tarantino has, like I said, I think he's talented. He's not to everybody's taste. And getting back to Django Unchained, it looks like it's going to probably leave a bad taste in one's mouth, just judging by what I've heard about it and by what the preview looks like and everything like that. But I'm still not advocating a boycott.
Well, yeah,
personally.
On the BBC, they were interviewing Tarantino, and he was saying it was a love story
between Django and his. I think
that's right. He's trying to win back his woman from the evildoers, and
Mm-hmm.
I guess Leonardo DiCaprio's character. I'm sure there's going to be some like rape scene or something where he's
probably
raping Django's woman.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think from a kind of filmic point of view, the main interest is he's sort of recycling this whole kind of spaghetti western genre.
Yeah. He's also recycling like Mandingo, and that's what I kind of thought. This kind of 70s almost softcore porn.
Well, he's got to do something different from Sergio Leone, hasn't he? So.
Right. Well, the spaghetti westerns were kind of almost like Nietzschean or something in a, Clint Eastwood, the good, the bad, and the ugly. They're pretty harsh view of existence.
Mm-hmm. What is Mandingo about? I don't think I've seen it.
I think it's some, slave women.
Mandingo was a novel, and then they made I think they probably made a B movie, didn't they?
Yeah.
Some years ago.
Okay. Like a blaxploitation kind of thing?
Definitely.
Well, that blaxploitation sounds very 70s. I think Mandingo is more like plantation stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was the
it's
same
like alternative history of the South or something. There's a slave revolt.
Right.
Well,
I think it's also like white women in love with this, primitive black man.
It's like Lady Chatterley's lover, but with blacks instead of gamekeepers.
Yeah. Well, let me just mention real quick about the conservatives. There was this kind of minor scandal that occurred this past week with the Drudge Report, and Drudge actually put on his homepage. He put, the N-word, the N-word, the N-word. I hesitate to say the N-word on tape because I'm sure our enemies will just...
Your enemies will use it against you.
Yes. So not that I think... it doesn't really bother me to say it in the slightest. I can't believe we're so obsessed with this word. But anyway, I won't say it. And but he had N-word, the N-word, the N-word, and I believe he replaced the I with an asterisk or something like that. And essentially what he was doing is...
It could be Nagger.
Right. Yeah. That was really a classic South Park. What was the question? It was like, these people are really annoying or something. And he's like, well...
It was the Wheel of Fortune. I remember that.
Yeah, that was the classic best South Park ever. I'm putting that in the show notes. Let me just write this down. Okay. Yeah, where was I? Right. And so he had Nagger on his homepage. And essentially he was doing the typical conservative movement PC judo, where you essentially claim that, like, the liberals are the real racists, look at them, they're using the N-word in a movie, that's so terrible. And then the liberals were kind of like, well, this takes place in, 5 years before the Civil War in the, plantation era South, and so of course they're using naggers. It fits it right in, which is which is quite
well,
true.
Nagging led to the Civil War, I think.
Nagging. Well, there is the Nagro question, which. But anyway, so then they of course turned back and accused Drudge of being a racist. So we get in this kind of typical postmodern dilemma of like who's more racist, and they're nagging each other about this. So I found that a little bit funny. Maybe
was this a line of dialogue from the movie that he was printing, or that he?
Well, I think essentially in the film, for alliterative effect, and the nagger is like appears 250 times in this film. Like at least once a minute.
Yeah.
Anyway, I just found that kind of a bit silly. Silly on both parts, really. But I think in some ways the liberals are probably more in the right than the conservatives, because Drudge was kind of race baiting in the sense that I define that word in my column on John Derbyshire a couple months ago, or how Colin defined it in his idea of subconscious racism of you're essentially denying that you're race baiting, but then you're still race baiting.
It's like racism with deniability, yeah.
Yeah, plausible deniable racism, and but that works, and that tweaks people, and it pushes their buttons unconsciously, and I think Drudge is a master of that.
Yeah.
So he clearly was doing that, but maybe Tarantino is as well. I mean, maybe you have this everything flips over into its opposite. Maybe Tarantino he's ultimately depicting these slaves as a bunch of naggers.
I mean, would anybody be talking about Django if the protagonist was like from Bulgaria or whatever? I mean, the fact that the main character is this black guy, that just pushes everybody's sub-racist buttons and gets people thinking about the movie. It's the same thing with the will the next Bond be black? I mean, that was a great way to sort of get the movie up there in people's consciousness.
Yeah,
it's just a very, very effective way of getting a lot of attention for something in a society where everybody is secretly thinking about race all the time.
I don't think Tarantino is PC at all. I mean, I remember Pulp Fiction came out at the high watermark of the PC movement.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, Tarantino, he does all this with plausible deniability because he depicts all these mafioso. But whatever Tarantino thinks is always kind of shrouded in mystery, or you can only look at him indirectly.
Right.
But
just check where he lives, and then you'll know if he's a racist or not.
Well, I think he's definitely a racist. I would assume he's isolated himself, much like the vast majority of liberal America.
Still, he's probably quite fond of Jewish people, I should imagine.
Well, yeah, I think the Weinstein brothers produced most of his films, so
they've made him rich.
Yeah, I don't think he can be too anti-Semitic. Well, anyway, shall we move on to our final topic of Christmas?
Nice Semitic topic to end with. Or is it?
Well, it's both. It's Hegelian. It's both. Christianity is both a kind of culmination of Judaism and wildly anti-Semitic all at the same time. I mean, that's at least how I read it. But it's all very ironic. But anyway, we are recording this on, I should have mentioned this at the beginning of the podcast, on Saturday the 22nd, and I'll put this out.
The day after the end of the world.
Yes, the world did not end, so we're able to continue Vanguard.
Oh, what a pity, yeah.
Pity in a way. But I'll probably edit this tonight and get it out first thing tomorrow morning on the 23rd. And so this Tuesday is my favorite holiday, Christmas. But anyway, yeah, I mean, we can talk about all these. I think it's good to talk about the war on Christmas and all that kind of stuff, because I think the war on Christmas is a lot more nuanced and multifaceted than a lot of people depict it. But I think first off, it is interesting, this whole Christmas idea. It's really it's a kind of, and the pagan aspects are and those are the aspects that are really powerful with people that stir them on a deep unconscious level. And I think everyone loves it. Even the hardened secularist and atheist love Christmas. I don't know if anyone hates Christmas. Do you guys have a favorite Christmas film?
It's probably the usual one. It's a Wonderful Life.
Yeah, I think I might have to go with the same.
That's the one that springs to mind. Of course, there's also Scrooge. The old one with Alistair Sim is Scrooge. And
Christmas Carol. I love A Christmas Carol too.
Yeah, I think
really do.
There are a lot of good versions of Dickens' Christmas carols that have been produced over the years. I think those are all. I think Dickens really got at something kind of universal with Scrooge. And it was also, and I've always liked this. I remember I should go rewatch some of these. I remember there was one that was made in the 80s I thought was really cool, and even the Bill Murray one was kind of fun. But I think in some ways what it is Dickens wrote. It was almost like Shylock redeemed. That's almost like what Scrooge is, because he wrote the Shylock. It's Shylock from Shakespeare's masterpiece, Merchant of Venice. But it's almost like Shylock goes through an inner transformation and recognizes the joys of life and becomes a Christian in a generic sense, but more so just has a kind of spirit of life and is not dominated by weights and measures and money and getting revenge and envy and all that kind of stuff. So I think in some ways maybe this gets back to that Christianity itself.
Yeah, but he's entirely motivated by fear and timidity, isn't he?
Oh, Colin.
No, it's guilt, isn't it? Isn't it? He hates to see.
It's pure fear, I think, because he sees the future and the
but he doesn't want to see Tiny Tim die.
That plays a very major role in his spiritual transformation.
Sure. Well, that's true, but I think he also sees. I remember there's one where he visits Bob Cratchit. Bob Cratchit, that's his relative, isn't it?
No, that's his worker. Oh, the guy that works, the clerk in his
oh, that's Bob Cratchit, right?
Who's
his relative, his brother. And I think he goes and visits them, and he sees how much fun they're having because they have this festive. And I think even his brother raises a glass. He's like, "Well, we'll raise a glass to Ebenezer," and then he kind of realizes what he's missing by not being part of, not having a joyful sense of life because. He sees these people are happy, they have a togetherness and family, and he's over in his office, counting gold coins or
Well, there's a bit of stick and carrot, isn't there? If you change, you can actually have more fun, and also you will escape the fires of hell.
Yeah, I don't deny what you're saying. But there is a kind of inner transformation. He doesn't just become nice out of fear of hell. So he's like, I fear going to hell, so I'm going to donate money to this charity.
He also has hedonistic reasons to join in the party.
God.
Colin. Well, no, he also doesn't like, he sees Tiny Tim, a future where Tiny Tim dies because of his greed, because of his own greed and his, withholding, paying his employee properly. So this crippled boy suffers and gets sick and then dies.
That's the emotional heart of the story there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think that it is, it is an amazing story, and it's continued to resonate.
Yeah.
So Dickens really got at something. The fact that you can revive something infinitely in all these different forms, and it's still kind of good. Yeah, even like Bill Murray, that Bill Murray movie from the late 80s or early 90s, Scrooged, that's still actually kind of good, because it has the same, it has the same story. Even like bad productions of Shakespeare, obviously that you kind of wince at some places, but they're still kind of good because you have the text, but like, a bad production of a bad play is totally worthless.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I think Dickens was really getting at something. But anyway, that was a digression. But I will say I'm now motivated. I'm going to go find on either, Netflix, iTunes, or elsewhere. I'm going to go find that 80s version of Scrooge that I watched over and over when I was a kid during the holidays. So,
the classic one is the one with Alistair Sim. That's the classic. I think that's from the 1950s or maybe even the late 40s.
Well, this one was more of an update. It was probably made in the early 80s. I think it did have a good actor. I think it might have had Richard Burton or something.
That's Scrooge. Wow.
It might not have been that. It had a good English, trained actor who's could do Shakespeare, and he really,
It wasn't Patrick Stewart, was it?
I think Patrick Stewart did do a Scrooge, but that's not the one I'm thinking of. But we're probably boring. Okay. I'm almost guessing at this film. I'll go look it up. But there was a version that I remember watching when I was a kid that really I still think about. But anyway, the pagan aspects of Christmas. One could go on and on. The mistletoe, the Yule log, wreaths. The gingerbread houses, which are witches' houses, and even the day that it takes place is a Roman Saturnalia festival. It is kind of on a very deeply symbolic level. It's about the sun rising again. It's about which is Christianity, which takes back to Christianity as a deep myth of a sacrificed sun. Of if you think of the winter solstice, the sun is going down. And the days become shorter and shorter. We really feel that out here in Montana. It gets dark at about 4:30.
That's nothing compared to Scotland.
In Scotland at like 2 p.m. pitch black.
Yeah, sunrise 10 a.m., sunset 2 p.m. Yeah, there you go. That's your 4 hours. Make most of it.
But finally, when you reach the 24th, the sun is rising again, and so he's being born. And then Easter is a kind of spring festival, so on and so. So in some ways, Christianity is getting at something very deep and very pagan. I've also been struck by the way in which Santa is. There's actually a good book on this, which I found on Google Books. It's one of these cool volumes, well out of print, but it was on the history of Santa. And in some ways, Santa is a kind of Odin or Wotan figure. And he's a kind of, or Father Frost is another character, but he's a kind of avatar of a older patriarchal pagan god who's still around and has been connected with Saint Nicholas in somewhat tenuous ways. So anyway, I think these are probably why the holiday is so irresistible, because it has all these deep European aesthetics and primal myths that are connected with it, and that's why it's so irresistible. There's something more to it than Christianity. But anyway, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, I think the figure of Father Christmas is very important, and of course that leads straight back to paganism, which leads back to Wotan or Odin or Woden or however you want to pronounce it. And, that's a very important figure. And I think going back even further, it leads back to things like hunting. Traditionally, this was also a time for hunting. And so by hunting, people could have a lot of meat to eat in the middle of winter. Yeah. And also combining that with the winter solstice, the two things together are the essential ingredients of Christmas, which is this feeling of plenty at the darkest time of the year. Right. And Father Christmas is kind of like a resonance or echo off that earlier tradition, because he's flying through the air, distributing plenty, and he relates back to Wotan and the hunting culture of the ancient Nordic and Celtic people.
No, it is a fascinating holiday, and that's why, you can also look back at James Russell, or I'm sorry, what is his name? Russell, what is his first name? The Germanization of early medieval Christianity. Jim Russell, yeah, I was right. Jim Russell. And his book about basically the conversion of Northern Europe to Christianity, and the way that Christianity really became what it is today. Christianity was Germanized, or Christianity was converted to paganism, is one way you could think about it. And that kind of created the modern West. I mean, another one of the accoutrements I forgot is the Christmas tree, a massive phallic symbol that we worship in our living room. Needless to say, none of these things have any biblical foundation whatsoever.
But the idea of sacred trees is very, very pertinent to Northern European paganism.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, last week we were talking a little bit about, or I brought up C.S. Lewis with regard to Tolkien and the Narnia movies, and compare them to the Hobbit movies or the Lord of the Rings movies. And I know that Lewis, who was, of course, a Christian, really found it important to bring in all of that pagan imagery and ritual, and I think Chesterton talks this way as well. That whatever way you look at it, if you're a pagan, I guess you see Christianity becomes the minor part, and if you're a Christian, then the pagan aspect becomes the minor part. But either way, it's like there is this resonance. You see one in the other, and vice versa.
Yeah.
And so it's like this is a culmination of it. For a Christian, for C.S. Lewis and Chesterton and other Christian writers, it's like the birth of Christ is just on top of everything else. It doesn't mean that everything else gets, that you have to remove everything, all the pagan stuff. It's like this is the cherry on the cake, as it were, or the cherry on the pie. So that's kind of a way of looking at it as over and against the Puritan, the more dour kind of sensibility, which
has always been anti-Christmas.
Right? That's true.
In Scotland, New Year has always been bigger than Christmas, and that's the legacy of Puritanism.
Well, it's kind of funny. My wife is Russian, and she talks about the fact that there was a kind of ambivalent relationship with Christianity with communism, because they weren't just unequivocally anti-Christian. At some points they would, obviously, Stalin, destroyed churches and so on and so forth. Bolsheviks are obviously anti-Christian, but the communist regime kind of made peace with the Orthodox Church in a way, and it became more nationalistic. And so on and so forth.
When did they do that, though? When the Nazis were invading, or?
Well, yeah. You can see how they made peace with Russian nationalism, to be sure.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's a very complicated story, and I'm no expert.
After they got rid of Trotsky, that's for sure.
Yeah. Well, we should have a big episode on in praise of Stalin. Well, think about it.
We don't have to praise
I'll
him.
have to skip that one.
He got rid of Trotsky. He resisted the New World Order. He was a traditionalist.
He got rid of modern art.
He got rid of modern art, and he sponsored all these wonderful, this wonderful realistic style. He was a kind of right winger.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Okay.
Anyway, where was I? Oh, what my wife was saying is that in some ways, because of this ambivalence with the state and Christianity, the state would promote New Year's as the holiday, and it kind of allowed Christmas to be more of a family event. But that was nice in a way. It kind of allowed it to be more real.
This is her memory from her memory from childhood.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So it's more domestic than kind of public,
which is nice.
Official.
It's not a commercial holiday where you have to spend thousands of dollars, and I think is actually quite nice. You just give minor gifts, and you have a nice big meal, and a tree. So anyway, but yeah, what I was going back to is this puritanical Protestant anti-Christmas vibe that you get. With what wasn't it? The American Puritans, I believe, did not celebrate Christmas. They kind of banned it. In England, when after the Cromwell. Thank you. Too much bourbon while I do these podcasts. Cromwell dismissed Christmas. And so on and so forth. So you have this kind of puritanical Protestant anti-Christmas. I actually go, I hate to admit it, I think I've already admitted this on this podcast, but I occasionally will visit WorldNet Daily as a kind of gaze upon a train wreck, kind of thing of how awful conservatives are, or particular kinds of conservatives. But they have these videos on there where they're bashing Christmas, and it's for very puritanical reasons. It has nothing to do with the Bible. Really? It's it's a Roman emperor trick. They want you to worship foreign.
Exactly how it used to be thought of in Scotland.
That is truly. I mean, how awful can you be? I mean,
well, you have to think of it in context, because like Scotland's always been a very poor country, where if you didn't make every effort to sort of like accumulate wealth and get ahead, you might die.
Yeah.
So obviously in the much more kind of bounteous lands of the Mediterranean and elsewhere, you could afford to enjoy Christmas. But in a kind of cold, bleak northern climate, you're sort of driven to be very, very disciplined.
Yeah.
And so Calvinism was quite in keeping with the economic reality of the time.
Still.
Richard, are you drawing a comparison to the modern day what's been called the War on Christmas?
Well, yeah, this is the other War on Christmas.
Are you comparing that to the Puritans? Are you saying that maybe that was Puritanism transmogrified into post-Christian secularism?
I think
a lot of people see it as a kind of Jewish thing, but it's also, there is a kind of Puritan element in it as well, probably.
Well, that's a fascinating suggestion, but I think it's kind of wrong, or at the very least, it's kind of a reversal of that, because let's break this down. The Puritans were hyper biblical Protestants, and there is no basis for Christmas in the Bible, and thus this is some pagan heresy. But the weird thing about the War on Christmas, and I think this should be pointed out, and I think this is very interesting, and maybe it is some weird Hegelian subversive kind of thing, but is that what they react against really is the Christianity aspect of Christmas. Like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't know of many secularists who really want to get rid of wreaths or Christmas trees or things like that. I guess you occasionally will see that, like at a school, there won't be a Christmas tree anymore, and so on and so forth. Or
they call it a holiday tree instead of a Christmas tree.
Yeah, maybe they'll rename it. Maybe.
Look, why can't we just start a war on Kwanzaa,
The war on Kwanzaa begins here. I don't, we need worthy adversaries. So and in some ways, what they're trying to get rid of, they don't like a creche, or they don't like the Christ element of Christianity, of Christmas, excuse me. But I don't know many who were really like attacking Santa Claus. And so in a weird way, it's like, in this ironic way,
baby Jesus thereafter.
Yeah. What they're preserving is the kind of pagan Christmas. So maybe if I were a pagan white nationalist, I would be like pro-war on Christmas, because the residue that remains is a kind of anti-Christ paganism. Who knows? But yeah, you might be getting at something.
They're not getting any presents, are they, those people?
Well, this is another. I guess this is a question about it. There's a good article. I think I might go repost it on Alt-Right that Steve Saylor wrote a number of years ago, and it was basically about a almost negative assimilation amongst a lot of Jews. And what he pointed out was that the war on Christmas comes from somewhere, and it's not really coming from, say, immigrant Mexicans who are Catholic, second generation, seems to convert to Protestantism, but whatever, they're still Christian. And it's not coming from blacks who are very, at least self-described, Christians. It seems to be coming from Jews or kind of puritanical whites, the war on Christmas. And,
white liberals.
Yeah, white liberals. And so if you kind of, think about this is a negative assimilation process, in the sense that earlier in the century, a lot of Jews are, in Tin Pan Alley, Broadway musical type people, they were writing all these Christmas songs. And granted, they were quite secular and hokey. I'm thinking of, Rudolph.
How sincere were those songs? We have to ask that question.
Well, I think they were pretty sincere. Irving Berlin, he wrote White Christmas. Didn't he write like
Focus
America
on the
Beautiful?
Weather. That's the key point there.
White Christmas. Don't you see it? It's about Europe.
Not Montana.
There's that resonance there.
But right, you can ask how sincere the songs are. I think they probably were sincere, but they were kind of hokey and secular, and things like that. They were not really Christian, sentimental, but they were about assimilating to the dominant culture. And then now you have a kind of hyper-secularist war on Christmas. And I think that is an interesting, development. But, you can still say, again, I think the war really is on the Christ element of the holidays. I think the pagan elements of it just remain irresistible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's something about it. It's just, I agree. It seems to just, if you like, seduce everybody. Everybody gets taken in by it, no matter what they believe. Yeah, and I guess it's a good question. What is it? What is the it? That about it that does that. I don't know whether we'll be able to determine that tonight, but it's an interesting question.
Mm-hmm. Well, it is I guess it's very sad from a Christian standpoint that Christmas has become so commercialized. It's all about shopping.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Definitely.
The commercialism's a reflection of the kind of pagan element, because Christmas was always this festival of having plenty to eat in the middle of winter. Mm-hmm. So you can see the pagan element wins out. The Christian element, it's focused on this idea of Jesus being born and light coming into the world, and people are not really paying that much attention to how long the day is after Christmas. The seasons have become irrelevant to modern man. I mean, ancient primitive man, the fact that the next day after Christmas or whenever it was slightly longer, that was like, wow, fucking hell, this is really important.
That was reason for hope.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, but to modern man living as we do, the fact that one day is slightly longer or slightly shorter than another day has become completely irrelevant. So therefore, we tend to focus on the other aspect of Christmas, which is the idea of having plenty.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. I was talking with a friend of mine today. We were saying how with a lot of cable news and television that people don't have a sense of the seasons; they have a sense of the election season. Mm-hmm. In a way, it's kind of like 300 days until the election, or they have all these things like the fiscal cliff, which is all total BS, or the debt ceiling crisis, more BS, and they kind of
have a different chronology, which is divorced from reality, and which is derived from human, social, and financial structures.
Yeah. Mm. Yeah, exactly.
So So does this mean we need to destroy all technology and just get back to the primal essence
Hobbits
of
again?
Things? That's right. Is that the necessary next step?
No, maybe just destroying cable news would do.
Yes, probably right.
We don't have to become hobbits. Anyway, we'll call it a podcast on that happy note. And we wish all of our viewers a Merry Christmas, and and also all the best of luck for the new year. And we do hope that we won't be fundraising for long. We're not going to do this all the time. It's just during this season. But if you do value this podcast, I hope you will drop a few coins into our hands. We would greatly appreciate that. But until next time, Happy New Year, everyone.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.